There were multiple star wide receivers traded on Tuesday, and the Chargers did not get in on that action, and the price was steep, but it does not mean there is not still a move to be made.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Njoku, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, and to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, the NFL news wire was lit ablaze with a couple of big wide receiver trades. Davante Adams goes to the Jets. Amari Cooper goes to the Bills. Big moves from some teams that are pushing all their chips into the center to try to compete. And you can't help but get the sense that maybe the Chargers missed out on an opportunity to add a weapon to their offense. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other moves to be made. There's a couple of tight ends that might be of interest. Okonkwo or David Njoku. Definitely wouldn't mind adding him to the team. And we take a look at what the rookie grades look like so far. And let me tell you, really good.
Especially, where the bar was set as far as contributions that you get from your rookies or guys even that you drafted under the previous regime. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. David, the trade dam broke on Tuesday, and we didn't see any trades really for the entirety of the first 6 weeks of the NFL season. Then you see Davante Adams and Amari Cooper both get moved on Tuesday. And a time, I think, where a lot of these teams, right, like the 2-4 Jets, no, it's kind of now or never. We all kind of expected that move. We've talked about that move potentially happening, at least in regards to Davante Adams going to the Chargers. I think the one that hurts more of the two is Amari Cooper, but that was also a steeper price tag than I thought it was going to be. I don't know if I would have made that pick for basically a day 2 pick. So the Bills received Amari Cooper and a 6th round pick from the Browns, both in 2025. And the Browns received a 2025 3rd round pick and a 2026 7th round pick. So obviously kind of a 6th and 7th round pick swap there in different years, but in reality, it's a 3rd round pick for Amari Cooper. For a rental, David, I thought he would be a good fit with the Chargers. He definitely would have improved the Chargers offense, but I think in a long-term play, because that's the thing, is like these teams are thinking short-term, have to provide, have to win this season. And I think the Chargers do want to win and want to contend this year, but they have to look at the big picture too and how they want to build this thing under Jim Harbaugh. So to send a day 2 pick for a rental of Amari Cooper for 12 games, I think it just would have been a little bit too steep for me.
Yeah, I don't think the Chargers were in position to be able to go out there and make a move like that. And that would cost that type of capital. Considering the type of players and contracts and positions that they're going to have to look at trying to add to next year. Corner, defensive line. There's several, tight end. There's several, positions, offensive line, interior offensive line. There's several positions right there off the top of my head that the Chargers would look to upgrade, and you need your capital to be able to do that, especially if you want to do it effectively, both from a player standpoint and a contract standpoint. The best way to be able to do that is to be able to select these guys in the draft. So sending a day 3 pick for a player that you may possibly be able to have for about 12 games is definitely too rich for where I see the Chargers are right now, and for the holes that they're going to need to address in the offseason.
Yeah, a day 2 pick is too
day
much.
2 pick,
a day 3 pick, you could have sold me on that. I would have been upset probably if I saw Amari Cooper go for a day 3 pick.
Same.
I think the other thing that you don't want to do if you're in the Chargers boat right now is get into a bidding war and have to overpay for something, right? I think that's one of the things that Joe Ortiz wants to do is not just be active in the trade market, but also make sound decisions that are going to help in the short term
moves
and the long term. I think when the time comes and we see that window open up for the Chargers where it's like, hey, it feels like this is the year you go for it and you kind of push all your chips to the center of the table like you talked about. But this isn't that time for me right now, at least not through 5 games for the Chargers. I think you're trying to hopefully add somebody this year that can not only help you this year, but potentially help you next year too.
Yeah.
Which is something that you could have gotten with Davante Adams, but it always never made a ton of sense to us. We knew that he wanted to go reunite with his friend Aaron Rodgers in New York. He would have undoubtedly helped the Chargers offense in a way for sure. He's a great receiver. He was the best receiver in the AFC West probably, and still definitely seems to have some gas in the tank. But it also is kind of unclear how he would have fit into the future of this team, David, as a 31-year-old wide receiver. What was that extension? What was that money going to look like after this year? So he ends up going for a conditional third-round pick that could turn into a second-round pick. And if the Chargers did that for a 12-game rental, even for someone as good as Davante Adams, I just don't think it would have made a ton of sense.
First and foremost, the Raiders would have never traded Davante Adams to the Chargers. Let's go ahead and put that out there right now. I know people are like, oh, the Chargers could have made that. No, they couldn't have, because it takes two to tango. You have to have two interested parties to go out there and consummate a deal. I guarantee you they were never going to talk to the Chargers about Davante Adams. It just doesn't happen. You don't see those type of moves in division. So it was never going to happen from that standpoint. Now, from a business standpoint, you have a receiver that's on the wrong side of 30, that's already in that echelon of contract pay where we're talking about the $25 to $35 million range is what he expects, because that's what he's been paid. That's, what his production says that he should be getting. I don't think that we are in the days anymore where the Chargers are going to be paying receivers $35 million per season under Jim Harbaugh. I just don't think that's going to happen. And so with this situation, he was never going to come here. The money doesn't make sense. The age doesn't make sense. The fit doesn't make sense. So this was always one where I felt like it was the Jets or nowhere else.
At the end of the day, though, it's two other AFC teams that look like they're getting better and maybe not passing the Chargers by, but at the same time, one of those teams you're going to have to play, right? You have to play the Jets later on the season. Now that game looks tougher than it did before for a 2-4 Jets team that kind of was lost offensively, right? Now they have Davante Adams, which probably changes things a little bit. There are teams that are getting better where the Chargers so far this year haven't, and we'll see what they can do. But one of the things we talked about when we approached the, Davante Adams potential trade was that if they ended up getting Davante Adams, it could mean a certain old friend would become available potentially. And we have this mailbag question here from DMC Ken, who says, with Davante Adams being traded to the Jets, should Joe Ortiz pick up the phone and inquire about Mike Williams rejoining the Chargers? David, this is something we talked about last week. We were in favor of it then. Now this has become a reality, and Mike Williams is likely headed out of New York.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Schultz already put a report out there that the Jets are going to make Mike Williams available for trade, which, I mean, I think everybody out there that has a couple of eyes and some sense knew that was probably going to happen. Also, you can see that, it's just not really working out for Mike Williams there in New York. He's not, being targeted, and they're not really using him to the best of his abilities. And we also know that Joe Ortiz and the Chargers did have interest in bringing Mike Williams back after they cut him. So I do feel like there's probably going to be some interest there. I don't feel like it's going to take very much compensation to make it happen. I think a 6th, 7th round pick could make this deal happen pretty easily. I think it's low money, and there's a deal to be made there. So I feel like this would be an easy one if the Chargers were going to be the ones to pick up the phone.
It would be much cheaper than had they gone and signed him at the beginning or in free agency, right? And most it's going to cost about $5 million, which is much less than he would have gotten from them. They have been reported to have interest, or did at least before he signed in New York. And I think after hearing his quarterback throw him directly under the bus in New York last week after the game-ending interception that Aaron Rodgers terribly underthrew no matter what, and then says that it's Mike Williams running the wrong route. I mean, it's bad, right? No catches, last game, including he got targeted in the biggest moment of the game, tried to stop and come back for it, and it gets intercepted. It makes a lot of sense, and you're buying low. He has 10 catches for 145 yards in 6 games. I don't know if there's a bidding war that's going to break out. I don't know what the list of suitors are going to be for Mike Williams with himself coming off an injury and also the limited production he's had this year. You know who does know what he brings to the table? The Chargers. And I think if you're talking about a day 3 pick, the way that Joe Ortiz has already been manipulating the compensatory pick formula and bringing those picks in, like we're going to see potentially 3 in 2025, day 3 picks, do whatever you want with them, Joe. You have my full trust. I don't think this impacts you further down the road, but I definitely think it's a cheap way to make your team better now, even if it doesn't solve all of your biggest issues. But it is a Chargers mailbag day, and we still have more great mailbag questions to get into, like if the Chargers could go after a different Cleveland Brown, David Njoku, or maybe spend a little less and get someone like Chigoziem Okonkwo. We're going to talk about all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about LinkedIn Jobs, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find a quality professional that is right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open for the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place, because on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. That is the biggest thing with LinkedIn Jobs, is just the quality of candidate that you're getting. You're going to get it fast, and hopefully you're not going to have to think about trying to fill that job months later because the fit isn't right. Find qualified candidates. Make sure you get the right fit with LinkedIn. It's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for their hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I also need to tell you guys about Prize Picks, because Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy, and me and David both play it. And one of the things we love about it is all you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. They also have great stuff like injury insurance as well, and you can also win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's also a great way to get in action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia as well. And the projections are already out for this weekend's game, and it's easy picking more or less than 195.5 passing yards for Justin Herbert. And you compare that with J.K. Dobbins rushing for more or less than 73.5 yards against a Cardinals defense that has allowed 153 rushing yards per game on average this season. So, not telling you what to do, but it seems it's that easy. You hit 2 of those, more or less on both those, and you win. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, David, let's dive deeper into our Chargers mailbag here, and thank you to everyone who hit us up at LockedOnLAC, or to those like Athir who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. Might have another mailbag show later in the week on an extra bonus show this week because it's Monday Night Football, which we probably should have made a question today, but right now, my understanding is it's only on ESPN+, which I think is absolutely damn ridiculous. We'll get more, and I could go on an entire rant. We could fill the whole segment with it. That is crazy to me that you're going to make people put that game behind a paywall. But alas, we do have great questions, including this one here from Lad McConkey season, who says, do you think the Chargers will go after David Njoku or Chigoziem Okonkwo? This is a good question, David, because I think for the Chargers, the receiving options at tight end have been underwhelming, I would say, at least so far. I mean, Will Dissly's fine. Will Dissly's doing as much, if not more, than we thought he would do as a primarily a blocking tight end that can do a little bit as far as simple pass catching. But let's be honest, pretty much the only actual production we've seen from the tight ends as pass catchers is in the screen game, which is like it's being set up for them. It's not a lot of, you know, great route running and guys getting open. Now, you bring in 2 different options here, David, 2 different contract situations, 2 different levels of production. One's only been in the league, you know, now in his 3rd season. And David Njoku, a guy we've been interested in a while. Do you think either of these guys could be potential fits for the Chargers if they want to trade for a tight end?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like what both of these guys bring to the table. I think with David Njoku, you know that this guy has been doing it for a very, very long time now. He's going into his 8th season, and he has a couple of seasons of really good production, 50-plus catches. Also averages 6.2 yards after the catch per reception, which is disgusting. It's very, very hard to bring that guy down.
Yeah.
And he has a very, you know, workable contract for this season at least. It's, you know, $1.2 million in 2024. In 2025, that jumps up quite a bit to $14.2 million. I think for me, and I think for the Chargers, if they're going to look to bring somebody in, they might lean more towards Okonkwo because he's on a rookie contract. You know, he's very, very, very cost controlled. You know, the money is not an issue whatsoever, and he has had a couple of decent productive seasons. 32 catches, 449 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 54 catches, 528 yards, and a touchdown. For a tight end, that's really, really solid production. I mean, we saw Gerald Everett have similar production and get paid pretty decent money for that type of production. So I think for the Chargers, that you're looking like, you know, we talked about in the previous segment, you're looking for somebody who can come in and make an impact now, and somebody that can be, somebody in that room for the future as well.
And I think the nice thing about both the guys that are brought up here is they're both at least under contract through 2025. So, you're getting at least a season, and 3 quarters out of them. And I think that's great. I mean, last year, you don't have to look far for David Njoku, right? 81 catches, 882 yards, and 6 touchdowns.
Big production.
This, to me, is why I feel like he's a buy low candidate right now, even if you'd probably cost more than I would be willing to spend for him draft capital-wise. We talked about Amari Cooper when we did the Amari Cooper trade show about what he did when he had just had no Deshaun Watson and had Joe Flacco out there. I just told you what his stats were from last year. This is what his stats were with 4 games of Joe Flacco. In those 4 games, David Njoku had 28 catches for 373 yards and 4 touchdowns. 4 of his 6 touchdowns he had in the season, he had in 4 games with Joe Flacco. Yeah. He almost averaged 100 yards per game with not Deshaun Watson playing quarterback.
That's really good.
I think also a lot of people, have talked about his injury history, and I mean, it's definitely a concern for sure. He's already missed 3 games this year, but I would say that, okay, it's maybe a little bit overblown when you take into consideration that from 2020 to 2023, he missed a total of 8 games. So that's an average of 2 games per season over those 4 seasons. So, with the Chargers injury luck, you would take that from a lot of players. But I think Chigoziem Okonkwo, I don't know why they would want to trade him, right? Because he's under contract through 2025. He put up a great year last year with really bad quarterback play, and I think that's one of the things that would be like, hey, let's see what this guy could do in this system. 54 catches, 528 yards, and a touchdown last year. Young, up-and-coming player. Who knows where the ceiling is there, right? The ceiling and the floor are still kind of undetermined with this guy. So you'd be taking a chance on a younger pass-catching option. Both of these guys are passable blockers. So I'd be in favor of either of them at the right price. I mean, I think for Chigoziem Okonkwo, I don't know what the price would be because he's just young. He's on a rookie contract, so he doesn't cost anything, but he also doesn't have that top-end production that David Njoku has. But I think they're both very interesting options. But this is a great question now that Davante Adams is traded. I didn't even think about this, David, but this is here from We Are the Storm, who says, do the Chargers now have the best wide receiver in the AFC West now that Davante Adams is a Jet? This is crazy, Dave, because obviously it's been a much maligned wide receiver room, but then you start looking at the wide receiver position in the AFC West without Davante Adams in it, and you're like, I mean, there's at least a conversation to be had here. I mean, I would say to me, clear and away the best wide receiver now in the AFC West is Rashee Rice, and it's not close. He's on injured reserve. So if we're talking about just active players, it becomes a little bit more interesting, but there's probably a couple of veterans you would still slide in front of McConkey, who I think right now is the Chargers' best receiver.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of those guys that you slot in ahead of Ladd is a guy that you just saw, a guy that was gifted a touchdown that he should not have actually got. But that is Broncos wide receiver Courtland Sutton. I mean, Courtland Sutton is a solid guy, and he's had some pretty good production for the last 3 or 4 seasons with up and down or uneven at best quarterback play. But this year, 21 receptions, 277 yards, and 2 touchdowns, even though it should have just been 1. But either way, that's neither here nor there. So yeah, I think it's definitely one name I would slot ahead of him. But I want to see what it looks like when the dust settles, right? When the season's all over and done with. I want to see what Ladd's stats look like then, because if this guy can stay healthy, we see it game by game by game. That trust, that chemistry, and that production continues to flow. So hopefully, that continues to really grow into something beautiful, because it looks like it has the ability to do so.
It does. I mean, he looks like he's legit. I think the hard thing for McConkey is you're judging him against guys on teams that throw the football way more, right? McConkey is easily on the most run-heavy offense inside the AFC West, one of the more run-heavy teams in the league so far in 2024. Yep. So if you're doing it just by the counting stats, it's going to be hard. He's like 67th in the NFL right now in receiving yards. But he is 3rd in the AFC West outside of Rashee Rice in receiving yards, and he is behind not only Courtland Sutton, and also Jacoby Myers, who has had bad quarterback situations, but has proven he's a pretty good wide receiver in his own right. But when you're looking at it more on a snap-by-snap basis, David, he's right there. I mean, the metrics show that he's actually been better than both of those guys so far this year. If we're doing it on a snap-to-snap basis, he ranks 19th in the NFL in yards per route run out of any receiver with at least 30 targets so far this year. So there's 48 receivers that have had 30-plus targets. 2 of those guys are in the AFC West, Courtland Sutton, and also Jacoby Myers. And McConkey beats both of those dudes in that regard. So hey, how many yards per route are you getting? When you run a route, how many yards are you averaging on that? McConkey is better than all those guys. So I'm not saying, hey, that's what it is going forward. But so far this year, That's been what it is. And he has the best quarterback, but he's not getting many targets, but he's doing a lot with those targets. He's been really efficient. So love what McConkey's been able to do. But what about the rest of the rookies? We're going to get into what we're thinking about this rookie draft class so far and what grade we're giving Joe Ortiz through 5 games in the season and much more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and NFL fans need to know that you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And especially if you're trying to do live in-game betting, it's great to know exactly how the game has been going, what has happened so far, so you can make the most educated bets for yourself. But the Chargers, like we've said, are opening up this week on Monday Night Football as 2.5-point favorites against the Arizona Cardinals, and the over-under is a touchdown more than it was last week at 43.5 points. But you can also bet for the Chargers to score in all 4 quarters. That's like a key for success / FanDuel bet for me. If the Chargers can score in all 4 quarters, you can get that at plus 1,000. And you might think the Chargers haven't done it. They've actually done it in 40% of their games. They did it weeks 1 and 2, but they haven't done it over the last 2 weeks. But could be the week against the Cardinals where they can get off the schneid, and you can get started with $200 and bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. David, let's get into more of these Chargers mailbag questions. We had some good ones. Thank you to the everydayers out there who hit us up at Locked On LAC to get your questions on today's show, and those who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the new lineup over at Locked On NFL, where they have 2 shows a game now covering the entire league. You get Tyler the Madman rolling in the morning, and you'll need no coffee to wake up with him, where you can kick back in the barbershop with my guy, Tony Wiggins, one of my favorite guys on the network, and really always bringing on just the best, the local experts who cover their team every day. So check that out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. But David, we have a question here, and I think it is a good one from Big Daddy E, who says, now that we are 6 weeks into the 2024 season and have had a chance to see the players hit the field, what grade would you give Joe Ortiz's first draft class at this point? David, preface this by saying, okay, still an incredibly small sample size. It's been 6 weeks, but it's also only been 5 games. There's guys we've seen much more than other guys. What are you thinking so far about the 2024 draft class?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at the 2024 draft class, you have productive guys from top to bottom. You have guys that have came in with expectation to be starters, and they've done very well with those opportunities. Obviously, with Joe Alt and Lad McConkey, kind of understood that they were going to come in and be, guys that were going to be making an impact right away, and they have made a positive impact, both of those guys. Junior Colson's been part of the linebacker rotations, dealt with some injuries. Justin Eboigbe has not seen the field at all. Tareeb Still and Cam Hart, they've started to play a lot more recently due to injuries, and I think they've acquitted themselves very well. Kamani Vidal just got his first opportunity in the last game, scored a touchdown, but is probably going to be your RB2 for the next couple of weeks. Brennan Rice, no snaps. And then, of course, Cornelius Johnson is not a member of the Chargers. He is on the Packers practice squad. So I think when you look at it right now, totality-wise, with all of these players, for me, it's a solid B+, and it's really, really close to an A, because you have guys up and down from top to bottom that are providing quality play, and if not, that impact play all the way throughout this draft class.
Yeah, and we'll see. All right, your first 2 picks are both starting for you and both playing incredibly well. I think Joe Wall has definitely given you enough to say, okay, hey, it feels like he can live up to the hype as a top 5 pick. And then you have Lad McConkey, who could end up being a steal. Already one of the best receivers in this draft class, even though he was like the 9th or 10th receiver taken in this draft class. He's been the real deal. And I mean, I think that gritty performance you saw last week, I think the grit he's shown in run blocking and other facets of the game, you just know, hey, if this dude's on the field, he's going to be a dog. And he fits in even at his size. Now, when you get past that, it gets a little bit blurrier. I feel really good about the corners to even go out against a rookie quarterback and not get picked on the way those guys didn't in the last game, even though you could say, hey, Tareeb Still a little bit at the end, sure. But for those guys who not look completely out of place, like fish out of water, because the other thing about Tareeb Still that maybe we didn't talk about enough is he's playing outside cornerback. That's not where his best fit is at the NFL level. He got pushed out of there out of necessity and is playing a position he's not as familiar with, at least at the NFL level. So I think that's also important to take into account. Cam Hart was not targeted. I would give it still, just knowing what we know and keeping the incompletes as incompletes, I can give it an A- so far. I still think there's a lot of incomplete grades on here. but I like it. And you can
Yeah.
see the vision. You can see how these guys, I mean, even just getting the amount of contributions, even getting the amount of snaps you've already been able to get out of these guys in year one has been awesome. And as Jim Harbaugh says, hey, if you're getting corners that are in the 5th round that are able to go play on Sunday and not get totally exposed, I thank you for getting any kind of guys that can play like that at this level. So we'll see how it keeps up. And what the trajectory, though, right now, I would say is extremely good. Let's get to this next one here from John Clark, who says, in what week will the Chargers surpass last season's win total? Dave, the Chargers won 5 games. They would need to win 3 more games to surpass last year's win total. What week do you think they get it done?
That would be November 3rd against the Browns, which is going to be their next 3 games. I do feel like the Chargers have to get fat on this part of their schedule, considering the opponents they're about to play. And they should be. They should be favored in every single one of these games. I feel like they're better than all 3 of these teams, and they need to go out there and get it done. And I feel like they have every ability to do that. You know, obviously with the caveat of Justin Herbert being healthy and continuing to get healthier and his offensive line being mostly intact, especially his tackles, because I think we've seen how important it is to have both of those guys out there protecting Justin Herbert so he can have the confidence to go out there and be Justin Herbert.
Yeah, and if he is, it's hard not to imagine they're not going to have a great shot to win each and every one of those games. Yeah, maybe I'm playing it safe. I'm going to say it happens in Tennessee. I think, 3-1 over the stretch seems very reasonable. Maybe I'm taking the safe way out there. But, I mean, picking them to win a 4-game win streak, that's not something we've seen very much over the last couple of years. I think we maybe saw it once under Brandon Staley. So that's hard to do no matter who you're playing. Obviously, going to Cleveland is always tough. They've been a total dumpster fire, though. Tennessee has been a dumpster fire. Arizona, hard to say. I mean, they might be the best of these teams. They might be, one of the worst. It's hard to say with them right now. And the Saints, after starting 2-0, are now 2-4. So this is the chance. You never know what the easiest part of the schedule is going to be when the schedule comes out. It really looks like it's this right now. And if the Chargers can go 5-0 over that stretch, right, including the game they won last week, it's going to put them in really, really good position with a really, really hard part of their schedule coming up against some very good teams so far. So let's get into one more question we have here, David, and it is a voicemail, and it is from Athir. Let's see what he has for us this week.
Hi, David. This is Athir. I love you, my baby. I know you are very smart. Okay, I got a question. What is the difference between vice president or president of football operations and the GM? And who is actually in charge? I would love to see you explain this to me, my baby. Thank you. Love you.
I think it's a great question, David, that he's asking you there. How would you break it down?
Yeah, so I think when you look at the Chargers kind of power structure, the way they have it separated like this. Ownership and executive management, which I would classify as the business side. And then you have the player personnel side, which is your general manager and of course your vice general manager or your assistant general manager. That's Joe Ortiz, Chad Alexander. So it's the business side of the football team and then the player personnel side of the football team. That's kind of how it's set up. That's really the major differences between those two. Sometimes those intermingle and they kind of get mixed up, which we've seen in the past. But hopefully now we have 2 distinct different branches to kind of run this football team going forward.
Yeah, what we're hoping for is a separation of church and state,
exactly.
Right? Which hasn't always been the case. But the question here is, who has the power, right? I would like to think on player personnel moves, which is how they have it, written in there on the website, that it's Joe Ortiz, and also I think with Jim Harbaugh, right? Those guys are the ones that are making the final move. Player personnel wise, the front office, that side of it should have the final move, and I do think that this year they do. Now, that being said, the president of football operations is John Spanos, who's the son of Dean Spanos, and there have been, people who have said in the past, there's a fine line, right? What is meddling? Because I think if there's any big trade or huge signing, right? If you're going to go spend a ton of the owner's money, there's probably a conversation there. I'm not saying, so maybe he does have technically the final decision there. Dean Spanos is saying, hey, I'm leaving it all up to these guys now, right? He's also saying that's what they've always done. But I think at least under Jim Harbaugh, you feel like he respects him enough to leave more hands off, right?
I agree.
But there have been times in the past where the business side and the family side has been meddling and been meddlesome and wanted kind of their imprint on the player personnel, who the team is picking side, which shouldn't happen. Happens all the time. It happens with a lot of owners, not just the Chargers ownership. But we're hoping the church and
like Jerry Jones.
Yeah, we're hoping this is a true separation of church and state. If they can handle the business side, go for it. Leave Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh to build this team. And I think so far we've seen that happen. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. The good news is tomorrow is crossover Thursday, Locked On Chargers, Locked On Cardinals hooking up. And we can't wait to bring that to you guys. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding us wherever you get your social media from. We post our show there every day on Twitter at Locked On LAC, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David on Twitter at DroTalk SD. Thank you also to those who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. And we might even have more fan stuff for you guys, another chance for you guys to get in on the action on Friday. But you know, it is your team every day, so whatever happens this week, any kind of news that breaks, you know we're going to be here to cover it. And then also after the game, as always, going live to discuss what happened. So big night, Monday Night Football this week, a huge chance for the Chargers to get to 4-2, which would be absolutely huge. We're going to break down how they get it done tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.